How's it going? Chuck Hewitt here with QuietKat e-bikes, talking to you today about building our 2024 Apex HD. First thing we want to do before we start unboxing the bike is just go ahead and check the box, make sure there's no damage. If you see any damage on the outside of the box or any holes, just make sure you take a picture and note that before you start the build. Once you've cut the tape away, go ahead and open the box up. Again, as I look in the box, I'm just inspecting for any damage, making sure everything looks good and nothing got bumped around while it was shipping. As I look in here, I'm going to remove just a couple pieces of foam off the top. I'm also going to go ahead, look in here, I'm going to pull out my accessory box and I'll find the charger and I'll set those aside for now. Once you have everything removed from the box, it's best to find a friend, get someone to help you out. We're going to lift this bike out of the box. If you're just by yourself, you can cut the box open if you need to, but best to lift it out if possible. We'll just go ahead and set the bike on the ground right next to the box, and we've got it out. Well, you've still got a friend around to help you. You can have them hold the bike up, and we're just going to cut a couple things off the bike here to make this easier to put into the stand. So you can cut a few zip ties. I can pull that rear rack off, set it aside. Perfect. And I'll go ahead and cut the front wheel off the frame, and I can set that aside as well. Perfect. Once you've got a couple of things cut off the bike, you can go ahead and put this bike in a stand. You can build it on the floor if you don't have a stand as well, but for today's video, we're going to put it in a stand so it's just a little bit easier to see what we're doing. One thing to note with our 2024 models is they come with an integrated dropper post. So this dropper post is collapsed for shipping. We're going to want to extend it up so we can put the bike in the stand. For the Apex HD, you should find the dropper lever in this little piece of foam down by the handlebar. You can cut that packaging away. You should be able to hit this lever and the seat will come right up so you can put that in the stand. Perfect. Once you've got the bike in the stand, go ahead and take a minute to cut all the packaging away. As you cut the packaging away, be careful that you don't cut any of the wires, cabling, or housing as you're removing the packaging. On our 2024 bikes, you'll notice that there's a couple big zip ties, sometimes a cam strap, compressing the fork. So as we cut these zip ties, just keep in mind that this fork is going to release and extend to its full position. All right, once you have all the packaging removed, again, just kind of checking, making sure there's no damage on that bike before we start putting things together. With all the packaging removed from the bike, it's time to start putting it together. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and put the handlebars onto the stem. Perfect. Before we get started building the bike, you can go ahead and grab your accessory box. We'll open that up. Inside this accessory box, you'll find a few things to help you build the bike. First off, you should find your owner's manual and quick start guide, and then you should find all the tools you need to put the bike together. You'll also find the pedals and reflectors, and we'll talk about those a little later. As we look to install the handlebars, the first thing we need to do is get our 4mm Allen wrench and remove these 4 bolts on the faceplate of the stem. With the faceplate off, we can go ahead and grab the handlebars and orient them correctly to the bike. If you look closely, you'll see there is a logo on the bottom of the display. You can spin that around so you can read the logo if you were sitting on the bike. Get that right in there. You'll also see the throttle should be on the right-hand side, and the keypad for the display should be on the left-hand side. Once we've got the handlebar sitting there, we'll go ahead and line our faceplate up, and we'll start that bolt just a little bit. Before we tighten that bolt down, it's best to get all 4 bolts lined up in the stem. We'll snug this down. All right, that's our handlebar installed. With the handlebars mounted to the stem, we're going to go ahead and find the suspension dropper post lever and mount this to the bars as well. This lever has a 3mm Allen key, and we'll go ahead and take that bolt all the way out to install it. This should be a pretty easy install. You can keep all of this wire management on there. We're going to put that lever over the handlebar and reinstall the bolt. We'll talk about adjusting this to your fit a little later, but for now I'm going to slide this lever over towards the keypad and tighten it down. Let's put the front wheel on next. You'll see the 24 bikes come with some shipping plastics here to help protect the fork. We're going to go ahead and remove that. We'll take the front axle out. This is going to be a 6mm Allen. You can see I can take one of these end caps off. I'm just going to set that aside. With the axle end cap off, we just want to make sure we are going to loosen all 4 of these axle pinch bolts. That'll allow us to slide the axle out. Nice. Now that we have those loose, we can go ahead and slide the axle out of the fork and take the shipping plastic out. We'll set our axle aside for now. Before we install our front wheel, we also want to remove our spacer from our brake pads. We'll set that aside. We don't need that any longer. With that removed, we're ready for the front wheel. As we install our front wheel, obviously we want to put the rotor on the brake side and make sure we line that up. I find it easy to grab my front axle and start it on the fork just like this. I'm going to go ahead and slide the wheel into the fork. I'm going to keep an eye on the rotor and line it up with the axle. Then I can slide the wheel into the dropouts. Once I have that axle aligned, I can slide the axle through the hub. Then I can come to the other side and get that into place until my axle slides through the right side of the fork. With the axle installed through the hub, I'm going to take my axle end cap on that right side, get the thread started, find my 6mm, and go ahead and tighten that back down. Once I've tightened the axle, I'm going to grab my 4mm and I'm going to tighten those axle pinch bolts back down. With our front wheel installed, this is a good time to check. Make sure that the front wheel is spinning freely and there's no interference between the brake and the brake pads. This bike looks pretty good, so we can move on to the next step. Our 2024 Apex HD comes with integrated fender and an integrated rack. You can see here the fender should already be mounted near the seat stay or in the seat tube of the bike. So what we need to do is go ahead and put the rack on and bolt this last bolt of the fender to the rear rack. So we'll grab our rear rack. We'll remove the rest of the packaging from our rear rack. You can see we have a little packaging to help protect it in transport. We'll toss that aside. And on the rack we'll also find the hardware kit. So let's cut that hardware kit off and set that aside as well. Our 2024 racks slide into the frame really easily. You can see we'll line up these 4 notches and that frame will sit right in with the rack. From the hardware kit, we're going to grab our 4 M8 bolts and we're going to go ahead and start those. We'll just get the thread started, finger tight, on all 4 bolts. Once those are started, I'll grab my 5mm Allen key, just put them about halfway in. Before I tighten down the M8 bolts, I'm going to find the M5 bolt from the hardware kit and the spacer. This spacer is going to set between the fender and the rack of the bike. I'm going to go ahead and line that up. You'll notice the fender is actually threaded, and I will slide that M5 bolt through the spacer down to the fender, and I'll tighten that down with a 4mm Allen key. Once the fender is tight, I can go ahead and tighten those M8 bolts that hold the rack to the frame of the bike the rest of the way. Next up, we'll find the pedals from the accessory box. You'll notice that the pedals in the bike are both marked right and left. Make sure that you align them with the correct side. If you have it available, it's a good idea to just put a touch of bicycle grease on the pedals before you install them. Remember, the right pedal is right-hand thread, so we'll turn that to the right to get it started. And as we install our left pedal, it's a left-hand thread, which means we're going to turn it to the left to tighten it. Once you've got those pedals started on the threads, you can use the 15mm wrench that came in your accessory box or a pedal wrench to tighten the pedals down. All right, last step for our bike is to install the battery. To do that, we're going to need the keys. The keys should have shipped zip tied to your handlebars. Let's cut those off. So we'll take our key and we'll insert it into the lock core on the non-drive side of our bike. We'll make sure we turn that key to the unlocked position to the left. We'll find our battery. Our 2024 bikes use a KP battery. It'll be a 30 amp hour battery or a 15 amp hour battery. Let's go ahead and take it out of the packaging. Once you've got it out of the packaging, you can remove that protective film from the battery cover. We'll find the discharge ports here. We'll make sure those are pointed down. Perfect. We'll drop that battery into the bottom first. It'll slide up and click into place. Then we'll turn our lock cord to the right. With our bike fully assembled, let's lower it to the ground and do our final check. With our bike fully assembled, we just want to do a final check and make sure all the bolts are tight. Really, it's a good idea to do this before every ride. I like to work my way from the front of the bike towards the back. I'm going to start up here. I'm going to check the stem bolts, both on the faceplate of the handlebars and also on the steer tube itself. Perfect. I'll make sure that that headset feels nice and tight. Make sure that my axle bolts, pinch bolts and axle are all tight down here as well. I know these are good because we did this as part of the video earlier already. I'll make sure my seat post clamp is nice and snug. And I'll check and make sure that my rack is tight. And I'll make sure that the dropout bolts are nice and snug as well. When we first assemble the bike, it's always a good idea to check your crank bolts too. Your crank bolt is going to be a 8mm Allen key. We'll make sure that that's nice and snug. This one feels pretty good. Same on the other side. While I'm down here, I can check and make sure my chainring bolts are tight as well. I'll also check the kickstand bolts on the non-drive side of the bike. Perfect. With all the bolts tight, last thing I want to do before I power everything on is just go ahead and double check all of the wiring. I'm going to start up here by the handlebars, make sure everything is plugged in. My display, my brake sensors, my throttle, my keypad. Just looking at all of these wires and making sure all these connections are secure. Last connection I'll check is the main motor wire down by the kickstand of the bike. Make sure that's connected solid and we should be good to go. Let's check the tire pressure of our tires. For these big fat tires, it's best to run them somewhere between 12 and 20 PSI, depending on the terrain that you choose to ride. Replace the cap. We'll check the back. Tires are inflated. That's a wrap on the assembly video for our 2024 Apex HD bike. Check out QuietKat.com for additional video support and tips and tricks on how to dial in your ride.